In 1957, Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman gave the world one of cinema's most iconic and haunting images. On a windswept beach beneath storm-darkened skies, a medieval knight returning from the Crusades sits across from death, engaging him in a game of chess. The waves crash nearby, the shadows stretch long, and time seems suspended. This is no ordinary game, it is a metaphysical wager. The knight is not merely trying to delay his inevitable death, he is seeking something much deeper. He is bargaining for answers. Does God exist? Is there meaning in suffering? Is death truly the end? In The Seventh Seal, this image becomes a powerful allegory for the modern human condition. Like the knight, we live in a world haunted by uncertainty. We no longer live in a time of stable beliefs or unquestioned authorities. The old gods have faded, and in their place, we've built vast systems, scientific, philosophical, therapeutical, trying to decode life's great enigmas. We read self-help books, sign up for mindfulness workshops, optimize our habits with productivity apps, and chase gurus who promise to unlock the formula for a meaningful life. Yet, despite this endless effort, something eludes us. This paradox was articulated with painful clarity by the 19th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who would have found in Bergman's Knight a kindred soul. For Kierkegaard, life is not a mathematical equation waiting to be solved, nor a system to be mastered. Life, he wrote, is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be lived. This single sentence dismantles centuries of Western philosophical tradition with its obsession for clarity, logic, and control. Kierkegaard saw the human being as caught between two irreconcilable dimensions, finitude and infinitude. On one hand, we are finite, we are born, we suffer, we age, and we die. We live in bodies that hunger and decay. We are subject to time and randomness, but at the same time, we are haunted by the infinite, the desire for eternal meaning, for transcendent purpose, for answers that lie beyond our brief existence. This creates a tension Kierkegaard called existential anguish, not simply fear, but a deep, spiritual anxiety born from the clash between our limited existence and our limitless longing. To cope with this tension, humans create strategies. Some dive into the aesthetic life, seeking distractions through pleasure, beauty, art, and stimulation. Others embrace the ethical life, trying to find purpose in duty, morality, and societal expectations. And still others take refuge in religion, hoping that faith can bridge the chasm between the known and the unknown. But Kierkegaard warned that even these paths, though noble in intention, can become traps. What he feared most was not error, but inauthenticity, the way we bury ourselves in activities, roles, and ideas that protect us from the raw experience of being alive. He called this despair, not sadness, but the sickness of trying to be someone we are not, or of living in such a way that we avoid confronting the essential mystery of our existence. This is what makes Bergman's chess game so deeply symbolic. Like Kierkegaard's modern man, the knight is not trying to avoid death out of fear. He is simply desperate for assurance. He wants a sign that his suffering meant something. He wants a glimpse of eternity, a whisper from the void. But he is met with silence. And yet, he keeps playing. This mirrors how many of us live. We think that if we just read one more book, listen to one more podcast, attend one more retreat, we might finally discover the secret to living well. We imagine life as a grand puzzle where every piece, career, relationships, health, spirituality, can be made to fit if only we find the correct algorithm. But this endless search can become a sophisticated form of procrastination. As Kierkegaard warned, we can become so obsessed with understanding life that we forget to live it. And what does it mean to live? To Kierkegaard, living authentically means embracing paradox. It means facing the absurdity of existence not with despair or denial, but with faith. Not faith as blind belief, but as a courageous commitment to life even when no certainties are offered. It means choosing love despite heartbreak, choosing creation despite futility, choosing hope despite suffering. In this light, Kierkegaard suggests that true freedom is not found in mastering life's rules, but in surrendering to its unknowability. The knight in Bergman's film will never outsmart death. No strategy will save him. His victory lies not in winning the game, but in choosing to live and act despite the darkness. Kierkegaard called this the leap of faith. Not a leap away from reason, but a leap beyond it. When reason reaches its limit, we must either retreat into safe illusions or leap into the unknown. Most never leap. They remain at the table, moving pieces endlessly, trying to delay the inevitable. But to truly live, one must eventually abandon the board. And this is the invitation of both Kierkegaard and Bergman. to stop playing the game and to look up to feel the sea breeze, to hear the cry of a distant gull, to weep and to laugh, even when nothing makes sense, to risk meaninglessness, and through that risk, to stumble into a deeper, more grounded kind of meaning. Kierkegaard did not deny the value of reason. He respected its power, but he recognized its limits. He warned that when we place reason on a pedestal, when we make it our god, it becomes a tyrant. It promises control, but delivers anxiety. It offers clarity, but steals immediacy. He compared reason to a blade, sharp and useful, but also capable of wounding us if misused. The more we use reason to dissect life, the more life slips away. We become trapped in abstraction, living in ideas, rather than in the immediacy of the moment. So, what are we to do? We must choose to live as if life is a system to conquer, or to live as if life is a mystery to enter, fully and without guarantee. This doesn't mean abandoning thinking, but reintegrating it into a larger, more courageous form of being, one that includes feeling, risking, and even suffering. And for those who, like Bergman's knight, feel trapped in a never-ending game against death, perhaps the most radical act is not to keep playing, but to stand up from the board, to walk toward the sea, to live. As Kierkegaard reminds us, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And perhaps the first step toward truly living is to stop asking for guarantees and to start showing up for the dance, even if the music is strange and the ending unknown. He writes in one of his most famous passages that the greatest danger of all, losing oneself, can happen very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing. The tragedy of the intellect is this: the individual can lose themselves in the exercise of understanding everything, without realizing that in this effort they abandon themselves. The knight in the seventh seal, whom we saw in the introduction, is the living portrait of this tragedy. He seeks absolute answers. He wants to know if God exists, if suffering has a purpose, if death is indeed the end. But while negotiating with death, he is absent from the present. Unable to look into the eyes of the people he loves or to feel the sea breeze, his life becomes a chessboard of strategies. Kierkegaard identifies that behind this intellectual effort there is fear. Fear of chaos, fear of emptiness, fear of discovering that there are no definitive answers. The human being, he says, is a finite being tormented by the desire for the infinite, and this tension creates existential anguish. To anesthetize this anguish, we build intellectual castles, religions, theories, philosophies, dogmas. But these castles, although grand, are fragile in the face of the insurmountable mystery of life. And there is a subtle danger, the illusion of control. While we believe we have understood life, we feel a false sense of security. But in reality, we are merely watching life from the outside as spectators. We live in the realm of abstractions, disconnected from the concreteness of experience. Reason for Kierkegaard should be the servant of life, not its master. When it takes the throne, it transforms existence into an unsolvable problem. The Danish philosopher was not against thought, far from it. He himself was a brilliant and profound thinker, but he warned that the intellect, when erected as an absolute sovereign robity, passion and risk necessary to live authentically, he denounces what he calls the spectator of one's own life. One who lives analyzing everything, planning every step, but never truly steps onto the stage. And here is the great turning point that Kierkegaard proposes. Perhaps life cannot be understood in all its breadth. Perhaps it can only be lived. And living implies uncertainty, contradiction, paradox. It implies feeling fear and nonetheless moving forward. But if we cannot resolve life through reason, what is left for us? How then do we deal with this anguish that devours us from within? Kierkegaard's answer begins to emerge when he invites us to look at the ways we try to solve life, staged in the three stages he so brilliantly described: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. That is where we will go in the next part. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. If there is something that makes Søren Kierkegaard an absolutely singular thinker, it is the way he mapped human existence into three stages or spheres through which human beings desperately try to solve the enigma of life. These stages are not merely abstract philosophical categories, but deeply concrete ways of living, of positioning oneself in the face of anguish, freedom, and existential emptiness. Each of them represents in its own way an attempt to escape the abyss of uncertainty, a strategy to resolve life and silence the anguish that consumes us from within. The first is the aesthetic stage. In it, the individual lives driven by pleasure, novelty, and sensations. It is the realm of impulses, the incessant search for stimuli, for exciting experiences that anesthetize boredom. For the aesthete, The greatest enemy is routine. The meaning of life is always in the next event, the next romantic conquest, the next pleasure. But there is a fatal problem. Everything quickly becomes monotonous. Pleasure, no matter how intense, is ephemeral. The athlete, when not laughing or seducing, often finds himself torn apart by boredom and melancholy. Kierkegaard illustrates this stage with characters like Don Juan, eternally in search of the next woman, but always empty inside. The aesthete is a fugitive from anguish, but ironically he is also its prisoner, for living only for pleasure ends up revealing existential emptiness with even more brutality. Frustrated with the superficiality of aesthetic life, many individuals move on to the ethical stage. Here, stability is sought through commitment, duty, and moral rules. The individual begins to see themselves as part of a collective and takes on responsibilities. Whether in marriage, work, or society, the meaning of life becomes found in order, coherence, and the construction of a solid identity. The ethical man wants to be predictable, reliable, someone who has values. He abandons the constant search for pleasures and begins to want to do the right thing. However, Kierkegaard shows that even this stage is often a subtle way of trying to control the uncertainty of existence. Morality, social conventions, and the sense of duty can become another system that, although nobler than the aesthetic, is still an attempt to resolve life, to avoid direct confrontation with the absurd and with one's own radical ball. Freedom. Ethical life offers security, but not necessarily meaning. And then there is the religious stage, the most mysterious and paradoxical. Here Kierkegaard speaks of an existence that transcends both the aesthetic pursuit of pleasure and the ethical rigidity of morality. It is the domain of paradox, absurdity, and the leap of faith. Not necessarily a leap into an institutionalized religion, but an existential leap where the individual accepts that there are dimensions of life that cannot be understood, only lived. Kierkegaard uses the supreme example of Abraham willing to sacrifice Isaac in obedience to God despite violating all ethical norms. He calls this the theological suspension of the ethical. In the religious stage, the individual recognizes that reason cannot encompass everything, that living requires embracing contradictions, that true faith is not certainty, but passion in the face of the unknown. But Kierkegaard makes it clear, the religious stage is not an escape from anguish, but a place where it is faced with courage. It is in the leap of faith that the individual finally stops trying to resolve life as a logical enigma and decides to live it with all its uncertainty, intensity, and risk. Here there are no guarantees. There are no absolute certainties. There is only the commitment to live passionately, even amidst the paradox. And it is precisely in this religious stage that Kierkegaard introduces one of the most disturbing and fascinating concepts in all of philosophy: the theological suspension of the ethical. It is about that moment when the individual sometimes needs to abandon even their most sacred ethical convictions in the name of something greater and often incomprehensible that we will discuss in the next part. Because if living requires courage, it sometimes also requires sacrificing certainties that we think we cannot live without. If there is a term that runs through all of Kierkegaard's work like a red thread, that term is anxiety, or in Danish angst. For him, anxiety is not just an unpleasant feeling that we should eliminate. It is paradoxically the deepest sign of human freedom. It is also the engine that pushes us through winding paths to try to resolve life in systems, beliefs, or routines. Kierkegaard observes that human beings live torn between two poles. We are finite beings limited by the body, by time, by historical circumstances. But at the same time, we are capable of conceiving the infinite, the absolute, the eternal, the transcendent. We are temporal creatures who dream of what is eternal. And this chasm between finitude and infinitude generates a very specific type of malaise existential anxiety. He defines anxiety as the vertigo of freedom. When the individual realizes that they can choose, that they are free in front of an almost infinite field of possibilities, a dizzying emptiness arises. Anxiety is not simply fear. Fear has an object: fear of losing a job, fear of dying, fear of the dark. But anxiety is much more diffuse without a clear object. It is a deep discomfort in the face of the openness of the possible. For Kierkegaard, the child is an excellent example of this phenomenon. At first, the child is not fully aware of freedom, but at a certain moment, they awaken to the fact that they can choose. And at that instant, anxiety arises. The world ceases to be just an external given and becomes a field of decisions. The human being finds themselves facing the immense weight of being responsible not only for what they do, but for what they become. And here, the tragedy begins. To escape this vertigo, we desperately seek systems that provide us with security. It is at this point that philosophy, religion, morality, and even science come into play. All these human constructions can function to a greater or lesser degree as defenses against anxiety. They offer explanations, rules, promises of meaning. They are walls we build to avoid facing the void. But Kierkegaard is relentless. He says that often these systems are merely existential procrastination. While we are busy trying to understand or organize life, we stop living it. We are mentally absent from the present, anesthetized in the illusion of control. The anxiety, which could be the engine for a more intense and true life, ends up buried under routines, dogmas, and artificial certainties. In modernity, this anxiety manifests in various forms: chronic anxiety, a sense of emptiness, crises of meaning, paralyzing fear of making mistakes. Technology, social media, the cult of performance. All of this amplifies the feeling that we are never where we should be. We live tormented by the fear of wasting life, but also unable to fully throw ourselves into it. Kierkegaard foresaw this when he said that anxiety is the state of one who is on the verge of freedom. However, for the Danish philosopher, anxiety is not just a burden. It is also an invitation to recognize our radical freedom, to accept that there are no guarantees, but that precisely for that reason, we can live authentically. Anxiety calls us to decide even without certainties, to choose to be protagonists and not just spectators. It is this anxiety that often leads us to desire certainties so absolute that we would be willing to sacrifice our most sacred principles in the name of something we believe to be greater. This is where one of the most intriguing and controversial concepts in Kierkegaard's philosophy comes in: the teleological suspension of the ethical. In the next part, we will delve into this fascinating concept. We will discover what leads a man to be willing to violate everything he considers right and good, not out of whim, but out of fidelity to something absolute. And we will understand why Kierkegaard uses the story of Abraham ready to sacrifice Isaac as the greatest example of this existential dilemma. For those hearing it for the first time, the expression teleological suspension of the ethical may sound like an academic enigma, distant from real life. But in Kierkegaard's philosophy, it is a key that unlocks one of the darkest and at the same time most liberating doors of human experience. The word teleological comes from the Greek teos, which means end, purpose, or goal. When Kierkegaard speaks of the teleological suspension of the ethical, he is saying that there may be situations in which the individual, driven by an absolute purpose, finds himself compelled to suspend, that is to put in parentheses, universal ethical norms. It is not about disregarding ethics or living in an amoral way. Rather, it is about recognizing that there are experiences so profound, so radical, that they completely escape common ethical criteria. The most famous and the most disturbing an example is that of Abraham, narrated in the Old Testament. God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, the son of promise, the heir through whom Abraham would be the father of a great nation. Humanly, morally, ethically, such an order is absurd, monstrous. No morality could justify killing an innocent child. But Kierkegaard in the book Fear and Trembling insists that Abraham is neither a murderer nor a fanatic. He is the knight of faith. He suspends the ethical not because he despises morality, but because he is obeying an absolute call, something that cannot be translated into ethical terms or understood by men. He is in direct and absolute relation with the absolute that is with God. This places Abraham in a terrible and lonely position. He cannot explain his action. If he were to tell anyone, "I am going to kill my son because God commanded," he would be seen as mad or criminal. And indeed, if God did not exist, Abraham would be just that, a monster. Kierkegaard writes, "If there is no God, then Abraham is a murderer. But if there is God, Abraham is the greatest example of faith." It is here that the most unsettling dimension of Kierkegaard's thought comes in. Faith is not a rational certainty. It lives in paradox and contradiction. It demands from the individual extreme courage. The courage to act without guarantees, to face the abyss, to risk everything for something that no one else can see or understand. The cost of true faith, Kierkegaard's radical vision for Søren Kierkegaard. True faith is never cheap. It does not come easily, nor does it offer comfort. Instead, it arrives clothed in anguish, trembling, and solitude. In Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard presents one of the most haunting depictions of faith, not as mere belief, but as a radical existential act that shakes the individual to their core. This faith, he argues, is not just reserved for religious devotion or biblical figures. It is a metaphor for all human decisions where no clear rules exist, moments of radical choice where we must leap without assurance. Kierkegaard's central metaphor is the biblical story of Abraham who, commanded by God to sacrifice his son Isaac, walks for 3 days in anguish before raising the knife. This act is not meant to be interpreted only through the lens of theology, but through the existential situation of the individual faced with an impossible decision. Abraham does not abandon Isaac out of whim, nor does he do it to gain anything. His decision is born from an inner commitment to something beyond ethical calculation, what Kierkegaard calls the teleological suspension of the ethical. This idea is one of Kierkegaard's most provocative. Ethics, he says, is not always the highest authority. There are situations rare, extreme, but real when the ethical order must be suspended in obedience to a higher, personal truth. This is not a justification for lawlessness or selfishness. Rather, it highlights the loneliness of the individual who must make a decision that no one else can validate, for which there are no established norms. This isn't just about Abraham. It's about the artist who walks away from a career in finance to pursue a life of uncertain creation. It's about someone leaving a marriage, not out of infidelity or cruelty, but because remaining would mean betraying their own soul. It's about a whistleblower denouncing a corrupt system, knowing full well that they are violating the law. These are limit experiences, where one must choose between the socially accepted right and something deeper and inner voice that demands fidelity. The weight of these decisions is enormous, because they come with sacrifice and solitude. The individual may never be understood. They may appear mad, immoral, or misguided. And this is where Kierkegaard draws a crucial distinction: the difference between the knight of faith and the criminal. Both go beyond the ethical norm, but only the knight of faith acts not out of selfishness, but in fidelity to something absolute, something inward and sacred that cannot be explained, only obeyed. This distinction is what makes Kierkegaard's idea of faith so radical. It is not belief in a doctrine, nor a passive submission to dogma. It is not irrational, but suprarational, a movement of the soul that occurs when reason reaches its limit. The knight of faith walks in paradox. He loves the very thing he is prepared to give up. Abraham loves Isaac more than life itself, and yet he raises the knife not because he wants to, but because he must. This is not brutality, it is the paradox of faith, which Kierkegaard calls both beautiful and terrible. In this gesture, there is pain, there is trembling, but there is also a strange kind of freedom, a freedom that cannot be theorized or explained away. It can only be lived, but if this is true, if life cannot be fully resolved by reason, if even ethics can be suspended in the name of something higher, how can we live without going mad? How can one navigate life in the face of such uncertainty and still remain whole? This is the question that leads Kierkegaard to one of the most powerful concepts in all of modern philosophy, the leap of faith. What the leap of faith really means, the leap of faith is often misunderstood. In popular usage, it's seen as believing blindly, as turning off one's mind in favor of emotional or religious certainty. But Kierkegaard's leap is nothing of the sort. It is not an act of the rationality, nor is it a retreat into sentimentality or superstition. Quite the opposite, it is the most demanding, most conscious, and most courageous decision a human being can make. The leap of faith arises from an honest reckoning with reality. We try to understand life through philosophy, science, ethics, religion, yet we eventually hit a wall. The mystery of life, death, love, suffering, purpose, these remain unanswered, perhaps unanswerable. At this edge, the individual stands alone. In that moment, Kierkegaard says, one must choose. Either they cling to prefabricated certainties, dogmas, ideologies, illusions, or they plunge into the unknown, trusting in something greater than reason. Not because they have proof, not because they are certain, but because they have felt, deep in their being, that there is meaning even when they cannot grasp it. This is not a denial of reason. It is the point at which reason bows to experience, to the living drama of existence. Reason may bring us to the edge, but it cannot carry us across. The leap is taken not in ignorance, but with full awareness of the risk. Kierkegaard likens it to someone standing in a burning building. To remain is certain death. To leap out the window offers no guarantee of survival, but it is the only chance of life. And so, the leap of faith is not an escape. It is a confrontation with fear, with uncertainty, with paradox. The one who leaps is not naive. They are, in fact, the most lucid of all. They know that life offers no guarantees, but every path is shrouded in uncertainty. And yet, they leap. This leap is not into chaos, or into mere fantasy. It is, paradoxically, a leap into meaning even if that meaning cannot be fully defined. Kierkegaard says it is a leap into God, but even if one removes the explicitly religious context, the structure remains. The leap is into life itself and to the possibility that love, art, courage, sacrifice, and commitment matter, even when we cannot prove that they do. The final paradox, freedom through faith in the end. Kierkegaard's vision of faith is not about obedience, it's about freedom. Not the shallow freedom of doing whatever one wants, but the deep existential freedom of choosing one's path in the absence of all guarantees. This kind of freedom is frightening. It brings with it anxiety, which Kierkegaard calls the dizziness of freedom. But it is also the only kind of freedom that allows us to live authentically. Faith, then, is not comfort. It is a struggle. It is the ability to live without resolution, to act without certainty, to commit without guarantees. It is to walk with trembling knees, but to walk nonetheless. It is to say yes to life, even in the face of death, despair, and doubt. Each of us, at some point, stands at the edge of that burning building. Each of us must decide whether to wait for answers that may never come or to leap, trusting not in certainty, but in the mysterious call of life itself. Kierkegaard invites us not to believe blindly, but to live courageously. Not to reject reason, but to recognize its limits. Not to escape responsibility, but to embrace it in its fullest form. To leap, even in the dark, is not madness. It is the beginning of a deeper kind of wisdom. The courage to leap, living the mystery of life faith, begins precisely where thought ends. At the edge of reason, when logic exhausts itself and the terrain becomes uncertain, faith emerges not as a substitute for knowledge, but as a courageous affirmation of life in its rawest form. This is what Søren Kierkegaard called the leap, a profound, existential decision that does not erase doubt but transcends it. The drama of the leap is real because it takes place at the crossroads of clarity and chaos, where the heart must choose without the mind's full consent. If life were simple, if every action guaranteed results, if every question had an answer, faith would be unnecessary. In such a world, we would live by calculation alone, navigating life with the precision of engineers, not the vulnerability of humans. But that is not the world we inhabit. Ours is a world of ambiguity, contradiction, and unpredictability. It is precisely because there is uncertainty that faith becomes possible and even necessary. Kierkegaard insisted that faith is not a matter of institutional religion or doctrinal adherence, although it can exist there too. Rather, he spoke of faith as an existential stance, a mode of being that embraces the absurdity of life and still says yes. True faith, then, is not found in formulas, creeds, or certainty. It is found in the moments when everything seems to collapse around us, when logic screams that it makes no sense to continue, and yet we press forward anyway. Faith is saying, I will love even when love opens the door to heartbreak. It is saying, I will create even knowing that recognition may never come. It is saying, I will live even when life seems meaningless. To have children, to write a book, to start a business, to lead a stable life and move to a new city, these are all expressions of faith, not because they are religious, but because they require risk, vulnerability, and commitment in the face of the unknown. To live this way is to refuse the role of spectator. Kierkegaard was deeply critical of those who observe life from the sidelines, analyzing, critiquing, and theorizing, yet never daring to act. Many people, he argued, live as if they were watching a play, applauding or booing from the comfort of their seats, never realizing that they were meant to be on the stage. Faith is the act of stepping forward, of entering the scene even when the script is unclear and the spotlight is blinding. This leap, however, is not made lightly. It is not naive optimism or blind confidence. The leap of faith is a decision made with trembling hands and a heart full of doubt, but it is also made with courage, the courage to be wounded, to fail, to lose everything. And yet, perhaps paradoxically, it is also the only way to truly live. Kierkegaard's most beautiful insight may be this: faith does not eliminate anguish, it walks with it. The knight of faith is not fearless. On the contrary, they are deeply aware of how much can go wrong. They feel every tremor of anxiety and every shadow of despair. And yet, they still say, "Here I am." They still choose to live fully, to love deeply, to give themselves to life without reservation. The leap of faith, then, is a refusal to reduce existence to a series of calculations. It is the end of bargaining with fate. It is the decision to stop playing chess with death, trying to delay the inevitable through clever moves, and to start dancing with life instead. To dance is to risk falling, but it is also to feel joy, and unlike the sterile predictability of calculation, Joy cannot be planned. It must be lived. Inevitably, one might ask, is it really worth living this way? Why risk heartbreak, failure, and loss when safety and comfort seem so much more appealing? What do we gain when we stop trying to solve life and start living it? Kierkegaard's answer is both unsettling and liberating. He insists that life is not a puzzle that, once solved, offers us peace. There is no hidden key, no final answer, no belief system that can insulate us from chaos, emptiness, or mortality. In this sense, life is not a problem to be solved, it is a mystery to be lived. For some, this sounds like a sentence of doom. Wouldn't it be easier if someone just gave us a manual? Wouldn't it be more comforting to follow a clear path, to know exactly who we are, what we should do, and how to achieve happiness? But Kierkegaard offers something far greater than comfort. He offers freedom. And freedom, though exhilarating, is also terrifying. It means that no one else can live life for us. It means that we alone must choose, act, fail, and try again. It means stepping into uncertainty with open eyes. Living freely is not merely doing whatever one wants. It is taking responsibility for the path one walks. It is facing the anguish of not knowing, yet choosing to move forward. It is feeling the vertigo of possibility and not turning back. Think of the knight in Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, playing chess with death. He believes that if he can just delay the end, answers will come. But Kierkegaard tells us that true liberation is not found in bargaining for time or certainty. It is found in letting go of the chessboard, in refusing to negotiate with the unknowable, and instead embracing the concrete experience of living. It is in the tears of loss and the laughter of children, in the sting of betrayal and the fire of love. That is where life reveals itself. The wisdom Kierkegaard offers is not a system to master, but a way of being. It is not about knowing more, but about living more. It is not about eliminating questions, but about carrying them with strength and grace. It is about walking with anguish and allowing it to deepen our existence, not destroy it. And here is perhaps the deepest truth. Each of us must make the leap alone. No one can jump for us. No one can guarantee the outcome. But we are not without guidance. There is something mysterious, some call it spirit, others intuition, or simply the will to live that calls us forward. It whispers that even without guarantees, life is worth it. Kierkegaard does not want to trap us in another system of thought. He does not want us to exchange one dogma for another. He wants to awaken Usta, shake us out of passive observation and into passionate participation. He wants us to stop analyzing the play and instead step onto the stage and perform with everything we've got. And so, the question comes to you, what is your chessboard? What is the strategy, the excuse, the delay that is keeping you from truly living? What are you waiting for? Certainty, permission, perfection? Because those things may never come. Faith is not about having all the answers. It is about having the courage to live without them. It is not about conquering fear. It is about loving, creating, risking, despite fear. It is about showing up again and again, whispering yes to life even when no seems easier. So I ask you, what would your leap look like? Would it be calling someone you've lost touch with? Starting a dream project you've buried for years? Saying, I love you first? Leaving a job that drains you? Believing again, even after being broken? Whatever it is, that is your leap. And if this reflection has stirred something in you, stay with the discomfort. Let the questions breathe. Don't rush to solve them. This space between thought and action is where faith is born. The journey of truly living never ends, but it can begin right now. So go, not with certainty, but with courage. Not to win, but to live. And that Kierkegaard would say is the most faithful thing a human being can do.